Hi everyone, I'm Daisy from Yoseka Stationery and welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be doing a nib and line comparison on Sailor's newly released 1911L 14 karat and 18 karat nibs. In December of 2025, Sailor came out with a really big announcement that they would be discontinuing their 21 karat nibs in their 1911L model fountain pens and replacing them with 14 karat nibs and 18 karat nibs. This is kind of huge news, but don't worry, because if you're a fan of Sailor's famous and beloved 21 karat nibs, that is kind of their claim to fame, don't worry, because these nibs will continue to be found on their flat-topped Pro Gear models, their King of Pen fountain pens, and some of their specialty nibs will continue to be made in their 21 karat gold nib. In today's video, we are going to be using our Yoseka Nib Log to examine the line widths and do writing samples of the 7 different nib sizes from extra fine all the way to zoom that are available in the new 1911L 14 karat and 18 karat nibs. So that means in this video, we're going to be doing writing samples with 14 different nibs that are now going to be found on the 1911L fountain pens from Sailor. So to do a really quick recap of the Sailor lineup, in case you aren't familiar with their models, I do have 2 of their models here to explain the differences between the Pro Gear models and the 1911 models. Okay, so you guys can see here that I have 2 fountain pens here in my hands that look very, very similar, but they are actually different. They're both Sailor fountain pens, and one of them here on the bottom is the Sailor Pro Gear model, and the one on the top is the Sailor 1911 model. And this is the 1911L, and there is also a smaller 1911S counterpart, and for the Pro Gear, there's also a smaller Pro Gear Slim. But when you hear Pro Gear, you're going to be thinking of this flat-topped fountain pen with the signature Sailor anchor logo here. And when you hear 1911, you're going to be thinking of this round-topped 1911 cigar-shaped fountain pen. So the change that is coming out does not apply to the flat-topped anchor finial Pro Gear and Pro Gear Slim models. It only applies to this model here, the 1911L. So that is what we're talking about today. It's an important distinction because I don't want people to worry too much about the 21 karat nibs, which will continue to be found in the Sailor Pro Gear models. And they're not doing away with this nib altogether. They will continue to live on in the Pro Gear models, the King of Pen, and the specialty nibs, as I was saying before. It's really only going to be for the 1911L models where this change is applied to. So we're gonna go ahead and do writing samples on our Yoseka Nib Log with each of these 14 nibs, and you guys will be able to see some of the differences. And after the writing sample, I'll give you some of my thoughts on how these nibs are different and my general personal opinions on these nibs. Okay, so there you have it. That was a nib and line comparison of the new 1911L 14 karat and 18 karat gold nibs from Sailor. And let's take a look at some of these nib logs that I just wrote on and talk about some of the things that I found while I was writing. So here's the nib logs that I was writing on. This is the 14 karat extra fine, and this is the 18 karat extra fine. And you might have noticed that for each of these nib sizes, from the 14 karat to the 18 karat, you're not really getting a big difference in line width, and actually you're not getting any difference in line width for the most part. So for instance, for the extra fine that I have here in front of me, I gave a 0.2 millimeter line width to both the 14 karat and the 18 karat. If line width is really, really important to you, and that's the main thing that you're looking at when you are writing with a fountain pen, just know that there's not a big difference going from the 14 karat to the 18 karat. The difference between the 14 karats and the 18 karats, which you guys can see here, really comes out in the softness testing, and that is what we expect. The 18 karat gold is a pure form of gold, and it is going to be a softer nib, which yields to more of the pressures of the hand when you're writing. So if you were to press down a little bit harder, you might see a slightly thicker line width. So let's take a look. So the way that I use this softness testing when using our nib log is the first set of lines here is written with no pressure whatsoever. The second set of lines is written with some pressure. And the third set of lines here, and these are up-down strokes, like vertical strokes, these are produced with quite some pressure, not so much that it's going to like damage the pen, but just more pressure. So like slightly increasing gradations of pressure as we go from each set. And you can see here, this is kind of where the difference is. And that's where I began to see the difference in all of the different nib sizes. So there is almost no difference in thickness for the 14 karat, but where there is a difference in thickness is the 18 karat. So the 18 karat is really where you see the difference in softness start to come through, because it yields to the pressure that you are applying as you are writing with your fountain pen. Let's take a look at another nib size as an example. Okay, so here are the nib logs for the 14 karat medium and the 18 karat medium. And once again, you can really see that the difference between these two, because they are both 0.5 millimeters thickness at the end, and you can see visually they're really quite similar. They have some difference in wetness, but the real difference is in the softness, which is what's expected. So as you apply more pressure in the 18 karat, because it's a pure gold, it is softer, and that's where these lines are a lot thicker than these lines here. So the 18 karat can yield to your pressures in your hand and your grip a lot more than the 14 karat would. And I just want to say that that's consistent for pretty much the entire nib lineup, all the way from extra fine going to the special nibs like the zoom nib and the music nib. The zoom nib is another one that I want to discuss for some interesting differences between the 14 karat and the 18 karat, which you can see the 14 karat, you have those same differences in softness. The 14 karat is a lot stiffer, so even when applying pressure, it doesn't really give you that much more line variation, whereas the 18 karat gives you a lot more line variation. The zoom nib is a special nib because it's one where you can alter the angle that you're holding the pen at to produce different thicknesses of lines, and you're supposed to also be able to invert the nib, so you're writing with like an upside down nib on the paper, and you are supposed to be able to do that for very, very fine lines. So this is one that's interesting because I did some testing here, which you can see. Here I wrote low, mid, high, and inverse. So on the 14 karat, the inverse is really quite unpleasant, I will be honest. It just feels a little bit feedbacky, it feels like it's scratching the paper a little bit. So even though the zoom nib is meant to be written in inverse, or it's meant to kind of work in the inverse, it really doesn't feel good to do that on the 14 karat nib. It really only feels better to do that on the 18 karat. So if you're getting a zoom nib, I feel like people who get the zoom nib really look for a zoom nib for its ability to produce all of those different line widths. And if you really want to be able to do that, you might want to go for the 18 karat, which is definitely going to be a little bit more expensive. But if you are looking for increased functionality in your fountain pen, like basically one nib gets you lots of different line variations that you can comfortably write in, the 18 karat is the way to go. Okay, so those are some basic observations that I found on the 1911L 14 karat versus the 18 karat. I will say that there is a perceived difference in the difference between the 18 karat nib and the old 21 karat nib that used to be found on the 1911Ls and now is no longer available on the 1911Ls, only available on the Pro Gear models. And so for those people who are wondering about this change, who are worried about this change because maybe you have written with the 21 karat Sailor nib for many, many years, you have grown to love it, and you really, really just love writing with this nib, you'll probably want to stick with the 21 karat nib because the 18 karat nib is not as soft and it's not as smooth and it's not as juicy in the flow of ink as a 21 karat nib is. But for somebody who is maybe more used to a 14 karat nib and they're just thinking about an upgrade, I would say the 18 karat is a nice upgrade. It's definitely perceivably softer, but the difference is not as dramatic as the 21 karat would be. So those are my general takeaways from trying out the new 1911L 14 karat nib and 18 karat nib. They are just as you would expect it to be, slightly upgraded versions of the 14 karat nib and slightly downgraded versions of the 21 karat nib. The differences are super, super subtle. If you're not already extremely familiar with the Sailor nibs and you've been writing with them for many, many years. So I would say that there is a price increase from the 14 karat to the 18 karat and then of course to the 21 karat. So you can kind of make your decision from there. Now, I did want to address in this video why Sailor is making this change, because I'm sure a lot of people will be wondering why this change is coming. And for all the speculation, there's been a lot of speculation, and Sailor honestly hasn't said too much on it officially, but I do have my theory just by looking at some of Sailor's most recent press releases and having had Sailor pens for the last almost 10 years. Sailor, just like many other gold nib fountain pen companies, has been dealing with increasing prices of gold steadily for the last 5 or 6 years. Ever since 2020 or so, the prices of gold have been steadily going up. And as a result, we've seen Sailor and lots of other fountain pen companies, almost every single fountain pen company, having to increase the price of their gold nib fountain pens in response to just the increase of price of the raw material of gold. Knowing this, and seeing some of the recent decisions that Sailor has made, including this, as well as, interestingly, on the same day that these 1911Ls were first released, Sailor also released a model of their pen called the Pro Gear Anchor. So that model is actually a celebration of Sailor's 21 karat nib, and it is exclusively in the Pro Gear model. I'll put a picture of it here because it's not available here in the US just yet. This is all in Japan. It's a celebration of Sailor's legacy of 21 karat nibs on their Pro Gear Anchor finial models. So this kind of leads me to believe that Sailor is trying to embrace and protect their legacy of 21 karat nibs, which they know that their fans and their loyal customers of many years have come to know and love and expect from them, while at the same time they are trying to address this increasing popularity and this surge of attention on fountain pens by creating a tier of prices. And that's why we're seeing this release of the 1911L in the 14 karat and the 18 karat. So whereas before Sailor really only had 2 pricing tiers, they had their 14 karat and their 21 karat pricing tiers. for people who are interested in fountain pens, now they're releasing a bunch more models with different levels of cost, which in effect creates this tiered pricing of different available fountain pen models, so that there's going to be a steel nib model of Sailors out there, and there's going to be the small 14 karat nib, then there's going to be the large 14 karat nib, a large 18 karat nib, and then the 21 karat nib. So this in effect creates almost like 5 or 6 tiers of prices that fountain pen enthusiasts who are coming to the hobby quite new can explore and kind of decide where they want to enter their experience with Sailors. So I personally think that's kind of what Sailors is trying to do. It's a strategy that they're taking so that they can continue to make fountain pens that are exciting for new fountain pen users, and coming to grips with the fact that the price of gold is really rising, really skyrocketing, but they also want to continue making this legacy 21 karat nib that their most loyal fountain pen fans have come to know and love for many, many years. So that's my personal theory. I don't know, let me know in the comments what you think of it. I know a lot of people have strong feelings about the increasing prices of fountain pens in the fountain pen community. Do weigh in on the comments, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. I know that there can be a lot of confusion when there is a change coming from a company that you're not 100% sure why is happening. So I do hope this video helped you understand a little bit more about the 1911L 14 karat gold nib and the 18 karat gold nib and how they fall within the lineup of Sailor pens. So be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to our channel if you'd like to stay up to date on updates in the stationery community and stationery news. And thank you all so much for watching. Bye.